Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. Today I am here to do a kind of random recent reads video. Now most of my recent reads videos this year have been a bit more focused in that I've been doing different videos for different kinds of books, different genres, that sort of thing. This video, however, is just going to be a mishmash of all the things that I have read over the past like month and a half-ish, so I hope you enjoy it. I want to start off by talking about the graphic novel series Saga, because back at the end of June I read the first 4 volumes, and I'm afraid if I don't mention them now I will completely forget how I felt about them and just never mention them here on the channel. I can definitely say that this time around I was far more engaged by the actual story and the actual characters than I was the first time I tried to read Saga, and I can genuinely say that I really enjoyed volumes 1 and 2. 3 was not quite as good for me, and 4 kind of lost me, and if I'm honest, I kind of skimmed most of 4. One thing I do really like about Saga, so far at least, is that although it's set in this kind of crazy fantastical universe, and although obviously these are aliens, not humans, they focus a lot on, you know, interpersonal relationships, and I think, you know, they're very realistic in saying that we live in a crazy situation. Of course our relationship's not going to be great, it's not going to be perfectly healthy, that sort of thing. I really liked how grounded it was in those areas. However, there are certain aspects I just don't feel that compelled by. Like, I mean, I guess it makes sense that if you're doing a long-term series, your characters have to make a living somehow and all that, but I just don't really, I didn't find that I cared about that at all. So when Alana started working, you know, like in that, I don't know what to call it, like a VR world kind of thing, or like in a space soap opera thing, I just didn't find like that was particularly interesting for me. So like I said, I kind of skimmed most of 4. I don't want to say that I'll never go back to Saga, especially because my library seems to own all of the different volumes, so, you know, occasionally I might decide to pick one up, but generally speaking, it's just okay. I wasn't like super blown away by any of it. Actually, now that I think about it, this video might be titled something like books that were just meh, because most of the books I'm going to be talking about today, unfortunately, were just kind of like okay or bad. I have one bad one, and that's what we're going to talk about now. And actually, this isn't a bad book, but it's just not something for me, and that is Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. I have decided to DNF this one, and I don't really feel too bad about it. I did make it through chapter 2 of this, but it was a struggle, and I just was not feeling compelled to pick this up at all. Every time I put it down, I just kept thinking of all of the other books I could be reading, so I decided that, you know, I'd give it a good shot, but I just wasn't gonna waste my time. Again, never say never. I might still decide to go back to this in the future, but for now, I think I'm just gonna watch the film, even though I know that it's pretty different than the book. I still think I'm gonna watch the film, and then, you know, I can at least see how it ends, because not at all compelled to continue with this writing style. Then continuing with the nonfiction audiobook kick that I have been on this entire year, I recently finished 2 audiobooks, the first of which was A Rope and a Prayer, A Kidnapping from Two Sides by David Rode and Kristen Mulvihill. I think I said that right. This one's kind of a hard book to review because A Rope and a Prayer is the story, the true story of David Rode getting kidnapped by the Afghani Taliban in 2008. He was held in Afghanistan for a few months and then taken over to Pakistan, where the Taliban knew that the American government could not go to find him, and I think in total he was a captive for about 7 or 8 months. Half of the book is told from David's perspective. He narrates kind of his day-to-day experience. He talks about the driver and translator that he was kidnapped along with, and you know, just kind of generally gives you a feel for what his captivity was like. The other half of the book is written and narrated by his wife Kristen, who was a creative director or something at Cosmopolitan magazine, as she kind of deals with his kidnapping back home in New York, you know, as she tries to coordinate with private negotiators, with the US government, with the Afghan government, as she just, you know, tries to do everything in her power to bring her husband home. I say this is a hard book to review because obviously a kidnapping is a very traumatic experience, and a kidnapping by the Taliban, no less, is even more so, but I just so I don't want to critique it really, but I have to and just tell you that I don't think it's like a fantastic book. I think it's okay. Yeah, it's okay. Basically, something that I was really surprised by is that the book is written very objectively. And maybe that's just because he's trained as a journalist, maybe because it's a traumatic experience and he doesn't want to fully go back into that headspace that he was in while a captive. But I was just genuinely surprised that it wasn't more personal. Yes, David does describe his physical and mental condition throughout his captivity, but he does so in a very kind of almost out of body way where it's just very matter of fact. You know, he doesn't really embellish too much when it comes to emotionally how he was doing. And even when he's like, oh, I was distraught or I was terrified, it doesn't come across that way. I feel like kind of an asshole for saying that you should sound more traumatized by your traumatic experience, but I really was just expecting something a little bit more real, and I was very, very surprised that given the subject matter, I didn't feel more intensely for him. I wasn't ever concerned about him. I wasn't ever really heartbroken by what either he or his wife were going through, and I do think that has a lot to do with just the very objective way in which the book was written. I was also kind of surprised by the way that the book ended, because at the end, obviously David is okay. He actually escapes from Taliban custody and makes it home to his wife, and you know, that's great news. We're all happy for him. However, I was really hoping to get some kind of a 6-month down the line update on his condition to see, you know, what the long-term effects of captivity were, what the long-term effects on the relationship were, and instead of giving us that, they kind of gave us an update on the country of Afghanistan, which I guess I understand because he's making the argument that it was the social, political climate in Afghanistan that ultimately led to his capture, but I didn't really care about that. I was more interested in seeing how it affected him personally, but again, the whole book is very impersonal, so I guess it kind of makes sense. To drop in a few more positives about the book, I do think it is very well written, even if the kind of tone was a little different than what I was expecting, and I really liked that you got both David and Kristen's perspective, because I think it just gave a more full picture of what it is like to, or what it is like when somebody gets captured overseas. So overall, I think this is an interesting read, and it's not something that I would say that you should skip out on, but it's not something I can heartily recommend because I do think it's just kind of an okay book. And then the other audiobook that I finished just a couple of days ago was The World as It Is Inside the Obama White House by Ben Rhodes. As the title suggests, Ben Rhodes was a staffer in the Obama White House. He came on during the campaign and then stayed for both terms, and he was a foreign policy advisor and head speechwriter for Obama. Ben doesn't really talk about the campaign too much, but he does take you through the early days of the Obama presidency, you know, when they're getting settled and figuring out their roles, all the way up through the very end of the presidency with the election of Donald Trump. Now, if you are at all interested in politics, and especially if you're interested in seeing the inner workings of a White House staff, that functions properly, I should say, I would highly recommend this book. I think Ben does a really, really great job of giving you as detailed of an account as he possibly can about his kind of day-to-day life as a foreign policy advisor and speechwriter. However, I personally thought that the most interesting thing about the whole book was the fact that it gives a really intimate portrait of Barack Obama, because Ben Rhodes was with him through the long run. You know, he ended up actually being one of Obama's closest advisors and one of those few people that, you know, Obama was comfortable being grumpy with or kind of snapping at or bouncing random ideas off of, and I just think it really shows Barack Obama the whole person. I say that because I think especially right now, given, you know, where we are as a nation, I think a lot of people look at Obama through rose-colored glasses. Is that the saying? I think it is. Which is of course not to say that he was a bad president or that I was not a huge fan of his. I definitely am, but I do think people tend to romanticize Obama a little bit too much, and I think what Ben Rhodes does in this book is just give a really honest portrait of a very human man who was doing his best to lead one of the most powerful countries in the world. That being said, I don't feel like this political memoir lived up to my expectations, and I don't think that it really hit the level of some of the other political memoirs that I have read so far this year. Again, it's not a bad book, it's very well written, and like I said, I think he does some really interesting things and gives a real behind the scenes look. However, it was just lacking that extra like oomph, that extra something something that you know, would bump it up to one of my favorite books of the year or one of the best political memoirs that I've read this year. I think part of that is that the general sense I got from Ben Rhodes at the end of this book was that he is just tired and he's kind of done. And it didn't really end on an uplifting, inspirational note, which obviously not all books have to, but I think that's something that I've really appreciated about the political memoirs that I've read so far this year, is that even if they, you know, are handling not so positive topics, even if they're talking about hardships or careers ending or you know, general problems in the way our government runs, they've all ended on a "this is what we can do better" note, and I just didn't really get that from The World as It Is. It's an interesting read, not the best political memoir I've read so far this year, but not an absolute flop either. Alright, so those are some of the books I have read so far this summer, and unfortunately the general consensus was that they were all a-okay, just not anything spectacular. If you have read any of these books and you would like to let me know if you have similar thoughts, if you thought they were all awesome or all horrible, I would always love to hear what you have to say. But otherwise, I think I'm gonna wrap things up. So thank you guys so much for watching. Whew, I need to breathe. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you next time. Bye.